I want to give you just a little feedback into to why we're here also. United Methodist Church in Lakewood, we are part of the UMC denomination, which has been socially active forever. Hugely involved during the civil rights movement, women's suffrage, child labor laws. The Methodists historically have been a group of people who just like, we care about things, and we're going to actually follow up with that. So that this is sort of historically our identity a little bit. This church at one point was very large, thriving, dominant part in the Lakewood area. Multiple services, packed house, all of those type of things. And over the years, it's had a little bit of decline. COVID certainly hit that. The couple years right after COVID, it was 16 people passed away from this church. And so when I got here, I was given a mandate by our district, basically, that they said, you have a year to determine if this church is going to survive past this year. Or do we close our doors? And when I got here and I started having conversations with our people, there were people who really still wanted to make a difference in this community. And they basically said, we're not done yet. And so we spent a whole summer in small groups, breakout listening sessions, really trying to get to the history of what this church has done, what were things that really mattered to us, and then what are we going to do about it? And with it became an honest conversation. We don't have a lot of human resources. We don't have a lot of volunteers who are able to go out and do things, and most of our able volunteers are either walking with cane or walker or a wheelchair. So a lot of like, hey, let's put up a big carnival. It's not going to happen. We're going to break a hip. We're not doing it. And so we started out like, what do we have? And we have space. We have high visibility. How do we engage the community in conversations? How do we host space for people to come, safe space for people to come and have dialogues? And the number one issue that kept coming up in terms of what do we really care about still? What do we want to be engaged in? Hunger and food insecurity was number one on the list. And so that's why this first Justice and Mercy Talk that we're hosting is on that subject. And we have Sue Porter who's going to share. And then we're going to have a panel discussion with the Little Free Pantries from Rotary, as well as St. Leo's Food Connection. In this facility, Nourish does run a food bank in the lower part of our education wing. I was talking to Stephanie, who's the local coordinator for this site. She estimates that it's about 300 different families come through weekly. And she also estimates that right now between 30 to 40% of those are attached to the military base joint, Lewis McChord. And so trying to get numbers and understanding, and families vary, right? Sometimes it's me and one other person. Sometimes it's 3 generations in one household as a family. And so there's a big piece there. And to be just really honest, the question coming from our church and some of our church leadership around these issues, because some of these issues seem bigger than we are. What can we actually do? It's just this, why do we care, and what can we do? Like if we're a small group of people, and that's going to be some of my question to our experts we've brought in. If we're a small group of people, or we're just living in the neighborhood and we're trying to help our neighbor, but what can we do? What difference do we make? And we want to get to some of those tangible pieces. Before I introduce Dawn as well, I want to talk a little bit about something called the social determinants of health. Not everybody knows what those are, but those are used in social services a lot, oftentimes by social workers, to determine someone's well-being. And this isn't just a mental, are you there, but it's sort of a list. And when I was doing the direct resources in Portland, in Oregon, if I were to determine someone, like one of them is, what is your access to healthy food on a regular basis? It's a question. If I determine that for someone, I have to be a licensed social worker, so I couldn't make an assessment of someone. But if we asked them in a survey and they self-identified, then I was no longer being a social worker, and I could do that just as a volunteer and a social thing. So we typically like to ask these questions, or at least my history is we ask these questions in a self-identifying thing. What is your access to food? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being really good, 3. And then we're working with people. Our goal is just to improve it. If you're a 3 and we begin working with you next month, we hope you're a 4, meaning you're having more access to healthy food. The next month you're at a 5 and you improve your standards. But social issues, food insecurities affect other things. One of the other social determinants of health is, what is your access to a healthy social or friend group? If you are low on food, do you have a friend you can call? If you don't have that, now your numbers are lower. What is your housing? Do you have a safe place to stay? Transportation, access to medical facilities and a doctor. I'm trying to remember what the other, but these are all sort of pieces that determine a person's social health. Not just well-being, not just mental health, not just physical health, like, oh, you're breathing, we did a physical, your pulse is okay, but if you don't have access to this, your SDOH begins to decline, which is going to lead to more and more consequences. And so we want to look at everybody we're working with on a process of helping our community and our neighbors increase their social determinants of health. All right, you didn't come here to see me. I'm going to invite Sue to come and share. I think there's a slide that has the itinerary or schedule for tonight. We're only going to be here an hour. I really hope to be out of here by 7:15, but after Sue shares, and no pressure on her, but I did challenge her to do a TED Talk style presentation, so you guys can evaluate that as well. She just gave me a look. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I just have to say, Lyle was my high school English teacher, so if I blow this, it's his fault.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. You're going to get a grade after this.
I know.
So we're going to let Sue share. We're going to do a little intermission afterwards, and I really encourage you to eat snacks, whatnot, and actually talk to people. Introduce me. If you, like, are you from the church? Are you one of the nonprofits we're associating with? Are you a community member who just heard about this? And my dream really is this, that if we can get some of our church folk to interact with people in the community and then interact with some of the nonprofits, and we put them all in the same place, that there's going to be some sort of cross-pollination, that something through conversation, through relationship, will germinate. And we really, at this point, just know, as a church, we're saying we don't have the answer to this. That's why we're here and engaging, so we can learn to help us even formulate the right questions to ask as we start looking at how do we engage with the community, how do we provide resources that are actually needed. So introduce yourself to folks during that little intermission. Then we will switch to a panel discussion, and I've got some questions for our participants. But then if you have questions around food insecurity, hunger, getting resources, where do we steer people, all of that, we're going to have a Q&A time that we want to invite everyone to participate in as well. All right, I'm done.
Cool. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Sue Potter. I am the CEO of Nourish, Pierce County. Some of you may have heard of us when we were fish food banks of Pierce County. But about, 8 or 9 years ago, we changed our name to Nourish. And we've been serving Pierce County for 53 years now. And 52 of those have been in Lakewood. Our first location in Lakewood was at Little Church on the Prairie. You may have remembered that. That was my first introduction. I'm a girl from Lakewood, and my mom would volunteer at that food bank. So when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was exposed to fish back then and made full circle to come back and work for them. So it's been a great 11 years with this organization. And today we run 23 sites throughout Pierce County in just about every corner, from Key Peninsula out to Graham, Edgewood, Roy, 4 sites in Lakewood alone. Actually, more sites in Lakewood than even Tacoma. So that's saying something about our community. That's kind of what I want to share with you tonight about how unique Lakewood is as far as being food insecure in comparison to Tacoma and other areas of the county, because there might be some eye-opening aha moments there for you just about Lakewood. But first, I just want to thank the church, because they have hosted us here for about 12 years now with our food bank, and we're so grateful, because without these church partners, we can't do our work, and this church has been just fabulous to us over all those years. But does everyone know or have an idea of what food insecurity means? Who can tell me what you think food insecurity means? Because I guarantee you don't have a wrong answer. Anyone? Anybody watch Ferris Bueller? Bueller? I saw this gentleman nod. What's your definition of food insecurity? Right. Not having resources or access. And food deserts. Good answer. Anyone else have another idea of what food insecurity might be besides you, Dawn? Or you can say too, Dawn. Dawn works for St. Leo's. She knows this answer.
It's actually a full spectrum of I didn't have dinner, enough food or resources to have dinner tonight. It could be I didn't eat, my kids ate. It could be I ran out of food by the end of the month, so I'm good the first, 2.5, 3 weeks of the month, but by the end, then I run out of money and resources. So it's just a whole spectrum.
It's a whole spectrum.
Not being able to have the food that we need to be healthy
And functional. I'm going to read to you the definition that I like because all of these answers are correct. Food insecurity means not having consistent, reliable access to enough affordable food that's not just filling, but also nutritious, culturally appropriate for your religion. It includes families who may only have access to that low-cost, highly processed food, or cannot access food that meets their dietary needs, for instance, if they're diabetic. Or, it's not just about having calories. It's about having the right food to sustain health, those social determinants of health, dignity, and community. So it encompasses all of that. Not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, skipping a meal, just living in a food desert and only having access to the highly processed foods at your local mini mart or fast food joint. So food insecurity has many, many different faces in the United States. So who's hungry in Pierce County? I was until about an hour ago, but according to the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department, about 1 in 8 Pierce County residents are food insecure now. That's a pretty high level. I think when I started in food 11 years ago, it was about 1 in 10 or 1 in 12. I'm looking at Dawn to see if she agrees with me back then. She's been around a while too. The highest level of food insecurity is amongst women and adults between the ages of 25 and 44. And interestingly enough, our friends at the United Way have outlined really well for all of us who those food insecure people are. They have named them ALICE, and ALICE is your next door neighbor. ALICE is an acronym that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. They're people who have jobs but don't have enough money every month where they have to make the decisions between food and rent, food and transportation, food and medicine. The majority of people we see at Nourish are either actively employed or seniors. It's the working people, the people who help you at the grocery store, teachers, people who support education in other roles, janitors, office workers. You'd be surprised at the people you see coming into a food bank. And now we're seeing a lot more people who are coming in because they've been laid off of work. They might have a house, they might have a kid in college, but that one company that made that one piece for Boeing suddenly is no longer needed. Boeing moved, let's say, to another state, and that company had to lay off most of their workforce. But that person who worked there was supporting their family, and they still have kids in college, they still have a mortgage, they still have a car payment, and suddenly they have to find a new job and a new career. And that's why the food banks are here for them. So it might not be who you expect it to be all the time. In fact, in Lakewood, and this is a project I've been working on for a long time and have pretty much failed, I will say. But in Lakewood, we see a lot of active duty military and veterans coming to the food banks. In fact, if any of you recall a few years back, there were some military food distribution events going on at Clover Park High School and Cheney Stadium. And that was Nourish partnering with a nonprofit out of Washington, D.C. called the Military Family Advisory Network. MFAN is their acronym. And their job is to support military families. And they have campaigns and research and fundraising and all kinds of mechanisms to support housing, financial literacy, and hunger for military families. They do an incredible study every couple years to measure food insecurity nationally at military bases. And I was shocked when they called me and told me this, that Joint Base Lewis McChord, the largest employer in Pierce County, is in the top 5 of the most food insecure bases in the country. Who knew, right? That shocked me. Anybody else shocked by that one? Yeah. And it's really hard to believe. Nationally, 1 in 5 military household is food insecure. At JBLM, it's closer to 1 in 4. Those are our neighbors. I mean, can you really swing a towel in your neighborhood without hitting somebody who's involved in the military in Lakewood? Retired or active duty? You really can't. They're our neighbors. So yeah, the very men and women who are defending our country are struggling to put food on the table. And the military has not really wanted to address this issue. Part of its pride, part of its stigma, part of it is honestly lack of financial literacy. So the military is working very hard on that effort. But think about it, if our military are hungry, that's a national security threat. And it's kind of a big one. If soldiers or their families are underfed, distracted, compromised, if they see that they're losing their family because of financial issues, they can't be fully engaged in defending the country. And thanks to organizations like MFAN, the Pentagon is finally starting to listen, and hopefully we'll start to see some things move on that. But that directly impacts hunger here in Lakewood. So I want to share just a little information on, how do people become food insecure in the military and in Lakewood and in throughout Pierce County, really. So let's break it down, as they say in the rock and roll world. Somewhere close to 12% of Lakewood residents live below the poverty line. And when we look at that more closely, well, let me just tell you this. Nourish has 23 sites. We served almost 67,000 guests last year through about 440 some odd thousand visits to all of our sites. That's a lot of people coming through shopping at a Nourish food pantry. The #1 area of the most need out of all of our sites throughout Pierce County is Lakewood. We collect zip codes from the guests we serve. And any given year, since the whole time I've been working at Nourish, between 14% and 17% of the Lakewood population visits a Nourish food bank one time at least a year. That's zip codes 98498, 98499, and all the JBLM zip codes. So the problem here is real. And if we take a closer look at why, it isn't because people aren't trying. They're ALICE, they're working, the military work. It's really the fact that it's such a high cost of living in this area. So if you think about the average median income of Lakewood in 2023, because that's the last time they tested it and published it, it was about $70,000, $70,500 for a family of 4. So a mom, a dad, an infant, and a kid, 5 or under. When I think about $70,500, I don't know, I think, oh, that's got to be a pretty good income, right? I mean, you'd think it might be a pretty good middle-class income. On paper it is, but in reality it's not. Let's say that family needs to rent a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Apartments in this area run anywhere from $1,700 to $1,900, depending on your neighborhood, the amenities. Do you have a garage? Do you have to pay for that carport? Do you have to pay for the storage? Those sorts of things. That's about $21,000 a year, let's say, ballpark. Utilities, internet, that might add another $2,000, $3,000. Childcare, how many people know about childcare costs? I was so glad when my kids got out of childcare. Infant care runs anywhere from $1,600 to $1,700 a month. So that's about 20 grand a year, really, when you think about it. Preschool care is about $1,300, $1,400 a month. So that's another $16,000, $17,000 a year. And together, that's about $35,000 a year just for child care. Ouch. So, you know, a traditional family of four needs food. Let's say you budget $700 a month for food. You know, you're looking at another $7,400. And transportation. How much do you think? I don't know. Let's just grab something and say you have to change your tires or get an oil change or you have a car breakdown. Gas is expensive. $4 grand a year. So, kids go to the doctor a lot. They're little germ pools, right? Especially when they go to childcare. I remember those days. So that's another, $3,000, $4,000 maybe out of pocket for healthcare expenses between all members of the family. So you're looking at about roughly, give or take, math in my head, 78 grand a year, and you make $70,500 a year. So you're already in the hole. But that $70,500 is before taxes. So when you take that home, that's probably closer to $59,000, $60,000 a year maybe? So that's who's food insecure. That's it. There's a direct correlation, too, between housing and food insecurity. Direct correlation there. Which is why I'm so passionate about it, because my job before food was Habitat for Humanity. So, housing and food. So even though that $70,500 looks like middle income, it's not. It just doesn't add up. It just cannot sustain a family. And at Joint Base Lewis and McChord, we all know there's a shortage of housing. I think trying to do 200 or 300 units of new housing now. And the child care center has a waiting list of a couple hundred to 300 kids. So if you don't have family in this area, which most of these young soldiers and their families don't, who do you turn to for support with food or child care or any kind of assistance? You turn to you, the community, Nourish, St. Leo's Food Bank, the Little Free Food Pantries that the Rotary clubs in Lakewood are doing. Our neighbors need us. But let's compare Lakewood to Tacoma, because Tacoma's the big city, right? Costs more money to live there. And I'm not talking about the nice condos on Theophos or the nice apartments down there, you know, the fancy ones. The median income in Tacoma is about 10 grand higher than Lakewood. It's somewhere in the $83,500 range. But apartments cost about $200-300 more for the basic 2-bedroom apartment. You know, if a Lakewood family falls short earning $70,500, a Tacoma family gets even deeper in the hole because of the high cost of rent in Tacoma. So depending on the neighborhood, and the high cost of childcare too, but depending on the neighborhood, the age of the children, other expenses, utilities, transportation, food, but housing's the driver. So Tacoma has a lot of the same problems that we have here in Lakewood. Their families look like they're earning more income, but they too are struggling to keep food on the table. The math just doesn't work. And food insecurity is always the first symptom of that financial imbalance. People will do what they have to do to keep food over their heads. We don't want food over our heads. We want a roof over our heads. It's Sunday too for me. And food's the first thing that goes. And then let's take a look at Greater Pierce County. You know, Roy, out in the Bethel School District, Graham, Spanaway. At first glance, the housing looks more affordable. People move out there because it's easier to find. If you can find a place to rent, it's usually cheaper. Not as much housing available. land's cheaper. You might find older housing stock that's more affordable. Rents might be more affordable, but the savings don't hold up because the costs shift elsewhere in their lives. So transportation becomes a major factor. If anybody's lived out in the Spanaway area or Bethel School District's 210 square miles of no public transportation. So if you're living out there and you need to get to a job in Frederickson, which is a booming community with lots of employment, or the port, or downtown Tacoma, or even to work on JBLM, transportation's an issue for you. You have to drive longer to get to work, to get to school, to get to daycare. It means more fuel, more wear and tear on your vehicle, higher insurance rates. Utilities can cost more. You've got well water, you've got septic, sometimes spotty or not so reliable internet. And internet can be expensive. Childcare is harder to find. Families might have to travel farther to take advantage of informal childcare arrangements. Access to healthcare is harder to get. You have to travel farther to get to healthcare. So grocery services, food deserts, grocery services are limited. You might pay more at your mini mart for that can of soup that you could get for 10, 20 cents cheaper if you had a Safeway down the street or a Fred Meyer down the road. So other services are limited, meaning families just pay more in both time and money in other ways. Does that make sense? Okay, good. It's Sunday, I'm making sense. Woo! So while housing might be cheaper in rural Paris, the additional cost of all that just eats away at a family's budget, and families struggle with food. So why does all this matter? Well, what it tells us is that whether you live in Lakewood, Tacoma, or rural Pierce County, the affordability squeeze is real. It shows up differently, but it's there. And food insecurity is the result. And it's not about people making bad choices. It's about systems that don't add up. It's about, our working families, the military families, veterans who can't cover the basics. And we all have to step in as a community and not just understand that, but support and be empathetic to our neighbors and compassionate to our neighbors who are going through it. So that's why Nourish Pierce County exists. That's why St. Leo's Food Bank in downtown Tacoma exists and serving Springbrook and other neighborhoods. That's why the lovely Lakewood Rotary chose to do the many free food pantries that are scattered throughout the area, because we're trying to take care of our community. We all are dealing with the same problem, just different faces to that problem. But together we can build the solutions. So I'm really honored to be with you all here tonight to talk about this and to share more. I know we're gonna have some really tough questions from Stephen tonight. But I just wanna thank you, because none of us, if you wouldn't be sitting here if you thought people in Pierce County should be hungry. So thanks for taking time away from the Mariners game and on your Sunday night to come join us for this. And I'm happy to take a couple questions or turn it over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, let's take the intermission and we'll get set up for the panel discussion.
And then we'll take the questions.
And then we'll take questions there. Each of the three organizations that are with us have some brochures and stuff on a table, and I would encourage you to go by there and just see what they're doing. You can talk to them. Again, I'm going to encourage you all. I know these are scary people in this room, but I want you to introduce yourself to at least one person that you don't know. Now I feel like I'm at summer camp. But introduce yourself to at least one person you don't know or you didn't come with. You can't turn to somebody you live with and go, I don't feel like I know you. That's not what I'm talking about. But then, so 8 minutes, and then be back in here, panel discussion, and be thinking about follow-up questions to this conversation, and I'm going to grill them as well. So, and please eat a cookie. If you don't eat a cookie, we're going to be offended that we bought snacks for nothing. You don't want to do that. All right, I would like to invite our panelists to join me on the stage, if you would, and we will shift to the panel discussion. And you are welcome to take any seat that you would like. All right, you guys get wirelesses because you're further away, and Sue, you can just use that. Your Sue does have an on-off right there, so just be aware of that. So we got to be introduced to Sue a little bit, but I want to give, before we get into the discussions, not everybody knows what the Little Free Pantries do. Not everybody understands what St. Leo's is. Is there actually a saint that runs it? Who's Leo? Like all of that. So could you just take a moment? We'll start with you first, Bob, because you're furthest away. But just a moment, introduce yourself and what the Little Free Pantries are.
Sure. Bob Ziwilski with Lakewood Rotary. The Little Free Pantries are an augment, if you would, to the food banks. We're not eligible for food bank support. We either receive donations from people or through collections, we buy items to put in the pantries. The pantries are different from a food bank in that they are 24-hour, 7-day-a-week access, barrier-free. And when I mean barrier-free, when we first got started with this in 2020, I checked with the food banks in the area, and some of them required ID. And if you're an undocumented person, that's a barrier. And just a quick story, and then I'll pass it over, but when we first started in 2020, I was going around taking pictures, and there was a trailer park in Lakewood. And I took a picture just so I could go back to the club and say, look, this is what it looks like, and here's what we could do. And I drove down the road, and a woman ran in front of me, made me stop, came over and said, "Are you ICE? Why did you take a picture of my sister's trailer?" And she was mad. And that was 2020. This is 2005, so it's not better.
Hi, I'm Dawn Whitman, and I'm the director at St. Leo's Food Connection. Our main food bank is located near downtown in Tacoma, 14th and Yakima, near Bates, in between like Bates and St. Joe's Hospital. We operate a variety of emergency food programs there. Like I said, the main food bank is open 5 days a week at that location. We do 3 mobile food banks that serve food deserts in the county. We do what we've called pop-up delivery markets. Out of the pandemic, one of the biggest learnings for me personally was that everybody does not know where St. Leo's is or use St. Leo's when they need food, emergency food, which was a shock. I was like, what? And also just the idea of, we have this for a long time in the emergency food systems, we've always had this idea that everybody should come to us. Well, we're located here, and we're located here, and we're located here. And really what the pandemic taught us was that there's a huge part of our neighbors that don't have the ability to get to locations, so now our pop-up delivery brings the food to them, and we set up mini food banks throughout the county for people there. And then we also operate a children's feeding program that focuses on at-risk kids.
Yeah, you look like you had a thought you wanted to chime in.
I just want to tell you a little bit more about Nourish. We are a no barrier, and I know St. Leo's is also no barrier food bank. If you need food, show up, we'll give you food. We ask for some basic demographic information voluntarily for our funding needs so we can report out. But if you need food, we're not going to turn you away. We will serve you. We don't require ID. We don't require anything but you to be breathing and standing there saying, I need food. We are set up as a grocery store at all of our sites. So you come in, get a grocery cart, and you select the items that are appropriate for your family and can plan your menus around for the week. Our goal is to serve with compassion, dignity, and respect, and to provide you with enough food for your household for a minimum of 3 meals a day for 3 days. You may have seen our mobile food banks rolling through Lakewood because we have 3 mobile sites in Lakewood. These are semi-trucks. They are not what you typically think of as a mobile food bank. They're full-blown semis. They go to every technical and community college in Pierce County. And they go to rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas. We take the food out to people through those vehicles. And we have 2 of those bad boys. And they serve Steilacoom, Pierce College, Clover Park Tech College, but are open to all community members in those neighborhoods, as well as a million other sites. Just recently, we have a very large focus on providing cultural foods to folks because this is a very diverse community. All of Pierce County is very diverse. And so we've had a cultural foods initiative, and I'm really pleased to say that we've established a new partnership with the Tacoma Islamic Center, and once a week we convert our mobile to halal foods, and we're able to serve our Muslim neighbors in need. So that's just a little bit more about Nourish.
Excellent. So Bob, on one of your displays out there, you have the acronym ALICE. Could you tell us what that is, why that matters when we're trying to figure out who needs access to food?
Well, Sue had mentioned that in her talk as well. ALICE are essentially folks who are working who cannot afford the cost of living, so they have to make trade-offs. On the poster back there, when you add in the people who are below the federal poverty level, that comes out to about 48% of the people in Lakewood. Another way to look at that is every other person you see in Lakewood has the potential to be food insecure. And one of the things I find in working with this is you can't tell who's hungry by looking at them. You can't tell whose family needs food by looking at them. And I sense a lot of times we look at people through our own eyes and, we're trying to maintain our weight, we're trying to eat healthy, and we don't run through the process of, are you actually food insecure? So if that answers.
Yeah, no, that helps us, I think. One of the things we were talking about just before we sort of started tonight, just the 4 of us were chatting, is how much someone's appearance can affect maybe community judgment or even judgments of nonprofits where someone comes to the food line and they don't look whatever that looks like, they don't look hungry to us. They look, they got a nice shirt on, maybe they have a nice car, and by appearance it'd be like, well, why are you here? And we make up stories or create myths around like, oh, they're just trying to take advantage of the system. How much does appearance, I guess, my question really, how much does appearance become its own barrier to someone feeling they can come and ask for help? I know some of you shared some stories already.
So I would say that actually that stigma goes both ways. So from the food bank side of it, you have, staff and you have volunteers, and whether it be vendors, donors, they're oftentimes do make that judgment call. They see somebody who's dressed very well. They see somebody who pulls up and parks in a very nice car, and often there's like, well, you're dressed better than I am, or you're driving a much nicer car than I do. Why are you at the food bank? One of the first things that when we get a volunteer, will say, oh, well, I took food out to this car, and it's a brand new car. Well, first of all, you don't know what their story is, The other thing is that we don't make that judgment call on people, because realistically, it's not a fun time to go to the food bank. As much as we all talk about how we want to, maintain people's pride and their dignity and be welcoming and love people and stuff, it's still not a fun time to have to come. And whether you're waiting, unfortunately at our food bank, we don't have inside waiting because we've moved in the building, so you're waiting outside in the weather, or if you're at one of Sue's locations, you are inside, but still crowded oftentimes, and sometimes the wait can be very long some days. So that's the first thing. It's not really a fun experience to go to the food bank. We do our best. The other thing is that oftentimes when you talk about people who are showing up in nice cars, I'm just going to share a story. We had a gentleman who had to come and complain complete some court-ordered community service because he'd gotten some parking tickets. And he shared with me over the time that he often feels really bad when he takes food from, because we're always like, well, you can get a food basket, you can shop while you're here doing your hours. And he's just like, oh, I don't feel comfortable because people always look at me because I have this really nice car. And then he's like, but really what they don't know is I had a very well-paying job, and I finally felt like I was in a secure enough financially position that I could go and buy a new car. And within a month, I lost my job, was laid off from my job, and now that car is my home. And that's how I got the parking tickets, is because I was having to sleep and find places to park, hopefully not be bothered, And so that's just something that really we have to keep in mind when we're making that. And when I say that it's on both sides, the stigma on the other side is, honestly, like this gentleman, people don't want to come because they feel like, oh, well, it's okay. There's people that are more needy than I am. There are people that are more hungry than I am. And so they feel like they are not worth coming and accessing the help that they need. So.
Yeah, that was actually one of the questions I wrote during Sue's talk was, what are roadblocks that people have to asking for help? So even if you need it, what's going to keep someone from showing up at a food pantry? And maybe that's why they would go to the Little Free Pantry, because they can go in the middle of the night when nobody's there and there's no judgment or interaction or whatnot. But what are roadblocks to people asking for help or getting help?
It's that stigma of having to ask for help.
Are you still on?
No, I'm on. It's that stigma of having to ask for help. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Well, sometimes pulling yourself up by the bootstraps means going to a food bank and asking for help. It's honestly, I've been there when I've run into somebody I know, and that's their biggest fear. Oh my gosh, I didn't think you'd be here today. And running and being seen by somebody you know, being a teacher being seen by one of their kids' parents. So there's so many different reasons. Or, I have a job and I come dressed in my nice shirt and I'm cleaned up. But what you don't know about me is that my kid is going through cancer treatment in Fred Hutch, and everything we're doing right now is to keep our kid alive. And I'm hurting in more ways than one, but I have to have food, and we've got to, do this thing. I'll never forget right before the pandemic hit, I was out at one of our mobile sites in Key Peninsula, and this lovely older woman, I'm gonna call her a Nordstrom's grandma because she looked really put together. Her hair was done, her makeup was nice. She drove a nice little Honda, nothing super fancy, but a nice little car. And she was lovely, and she was getting her groceries, and I was helping her take her stuff to her car. And she turned to me and she said, I don't want you to think I don't need this food. And I said, I'm not asking any questions. This is what we're here for. And she goes, no, my friends don't know. I'm on really expensive medicine. And my friends don't know that I'm food insecure because I try to look good and I try to keep, I try to put my lipstick on. I try to make my hair and I make sure my clothes are clean. But if you guys didn't come every week, I wouldn't eat because I have to buy this medicine and my insurance doesn't cover a lot of it. And I just gave her a big, huge hug, and I'm like, that's exactly why we're here. But getting over that stigma and admitting that you need something as basic as food is really hard, and we all try our best to make people feel welcome. I don't know if that's really answered.
Another barrier, too, is just transportation and timing. If you live on the wrong bus route and the bus route doesn't come here and you have to get yourself wired over here, I remember a lady in Springbrook, and St. Leo's goes there on Saturdays, and she used to go over there, and then her wheelchair broke, powered wheelchair, so she couldn't she lived on the other side of Bridgeport from where the trailer is. So she was essentially dead in the water with that. So it's timing, availability, being able to get there. If you have a job that doesn't coincide with the food bank's hours, you're stuck.
Yeah. I know transportation is an issue in Springbrook, which you've mentioned. I think it would be, how is, for some of us, we don't know what the food desert means in the terms been used. How is Springbrook a food desert? Or why is Springbrook a food desert?
So Springbrook is a food desert because there is not a grocery store for people to access easily. There is not public transportation, good enough public transportation. There is a bus that goes through that neighborhood, but it is awful. It does not meet up with any other buses at like a transit center at a good time. The folks that live in Springbrook either don't have a car or they can't afford to use the gas to go to the mobile food bank, to go into Walmart or Lakewood. 'Cause I don't know how many of you are aware that I believe it was Amazon bought out the property where the grocery outlet is. And so, or a big corporation bought out that property, and so now the folks who live in Springbrook have to either travel to Walmart or all the way into Safeway, which is very expensive for them. So.
Yeah, I was told that there was I was part at the Lakewood Network Connections meeting, and so Washington State Department of Health just did a study in Springbrook, and they did a lot of interviews, and one of the people said that now, geographically, Safeway's the closest, but if you have to take the bus, it's an hour ride each way because of the stops and the connections to get groceries, and then you can only buy enough groceries that you can actually carry back on the bus. And so that's a 2-hour commitment for minimal grocery shopping for what you can carry. Otherwise, they're having to get their grocery stores from the convenience store, which now we're talking about health, like how much is a bag of Cheetos really going to provide nutrition?
And it's an interesting thing because there are areas in Pierce County that a lot of people would not consider a food desert. East Tacoma is considered a food desert because they've shut down most of the grocery stores. There's Safeway on 72nd. They've now shut down the Fred Meyer on 72nd and Pacific. So folks that live in that area don't have a convenient grocery store. And one that's really surprising for people is the Northeast Tacoma Browns Point area. There's not a really central located grocery store in that area. And when you talk about public transportation, for those folks that don't drive, there's either none, depending on where you live, or it's even worse than what they have in Springbrook. It takes a long time to get anywhere. So.
Yeah.
If I could comment on Springbrook too, and if you don't know where Springbrook is, it used to be called McCord Gate, but it is physically isolated by I-5 and JBLM from the rest of Lakewood. The average income in that area is in the $22,000 a year range. They're very poor people. And it is exacerbated because if you drive down Bridgeport, you'll see a brand new gated apartment complex. Gated with security gates around it to keep everybody else out. And that had the ironic effect of raising the rents in the rest of the area, which led to a whole slew of evictions. And we used to work with Springbrook Connection, and one point they made that's not food related but very interesting, people would come in from there into Springbrook Connection to get some shirts for their kids to go to school. They would throw them away after 3 uses because they could not afford the laundry to clean the shirts.
Yeah, so food insecurity definitely affects other social determinants of health. So you mentioned that like rental costs, all of that also affects availability for food. So I don't know, like this U.S. history, the way things work, the assumption was back when people got paid weekly, right? So you get 4 paychecks a month, basically. Your rent was supposed to be equal to 1 week's worth of work. So whatever your income is, divide that by 4. You should not be paying more than that for housing, whether it's mortgage, rent, whatnot. And so percentage-wise, in the Portland area where I came up from, it was a little bit higher than here. Jason Scales, who will be with us next month, has the number around housing. But it's something like 40% of Pierce County is what they consider overhoused, which means they're paying more than that 25% of their monthly income for housing, which then takes away from everything else, right? So now I can't afford it and this and that. And with a lot of the shelters we worked with, a lot of people, how do people end up homeless? Well, so now you're food insecure. You're still trying to maintain a job, but you only have one good work outfit. You can't wash it all the time. Something breaks down. And so we actually figured out, this is very speculative, but a lot of the directors of the housing programs I worked with, that a lot of people who were overhoused, they were one accident and 3 months away from being homeless. Mm-hmm. Right? So if I had an accident, now I can't work and I'm overhoused. For 3 months, I've got enough friends I can call. But I can only stay on someone's couch for so long. I can only live in someone's garage for so long before it starts to become awkward and you run out of people to call. And then, you're in these spots. And so sometimes it is like, well, how bad can it really be? So people need food. If people can't get food, like, how bad is that really? Why should we care? Why should we care if our neighbors can't get food?
I guess I'd throw that back to you and say, why wouldn't you care?
Because I'm fine and it's survival of the fittest.
Well, and I would say that Sue mentioned the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
What if you don't have boots?
Exactly.
Well, so here's the thing. Generally speaking, our society has this idea that people should just do the things that they need to do to take care of themselves. We have this idea that, if you're not employed making enough money, well, just get a better job, get trained to do something else, get a different job, if Sue talked about earlier today, if you can't afford childcare, well, then find somebody, your neighbor, that can watch your child for cheaper for you. We always have this idea that you're just supposed to figure it out. And as we've gone along, things just keep getting like squeezed tighter and tighter and tighter. Neighborhoods are not the same. I would not have left my children with my neighbor when they were growing up. Oftentimes they would come to the food bank because we didn't use childcare. I couldn't afford it, so I'd pick them up from school and say, you're going to come and volunteer today. So just things like that. There's just so many factors that play into that about why we should care, because it's not just about food. It's about childcare. It's about housing, because then once somebody becomes unhoused, to get housed again is really difficult in this area. You have the rules about you have to pay 3 times the rent to be able to get back into a place. And I'm not talking a big fancy apartment. These are not great places to live, really. And it's just the whole thing just gets squeezed tighter and tighter on people.
Yeah, one of the things, I use this phrase a lot, you never know when you're going to step into someone else's bad day. Mm-hmm. Right? So sometimes we have to why was that person rude to me? But we don't know what's creating their bad day. And if you're experiencing food insecurity, all of this stuff, we usually, when things are going badly, that's not when we make the best decisions, right? And so now I'm dealing with food, I'm trying to figure out my kids, I'm trying to do this, and now I'm supposed to also, while I'm navigating that in 2 hours to go get food and back, I'm supposed to be looking for a better job in a tight job market, in a spot where I'm already frustrated and probably not making the best decisions.
Right. And food, I was kind of bugging you a little bit there with my first remark, but we all have to have food to survive. And when you're hungry, you're not thinking straight, you're low energy, you just don't function as well. It's the basic human need, food and water. So if we can't help our neighbors at that fundamental level, knowing with all the obstacles and burdens that they might be facing, we're letting our community down.
Yeah. I know at our spot here, they can go in eventually, and there's a line space inside, but a lot of people start lining up an hour before you open,
longer than that.
Regardless of the weather, because there is limited resources, right? So yes, they can come and shop, but at the end of the day, there's not as many options as the people who come in first. And so people are waiting to get through earlier. And so how, when there isn't enough food, I guess first of all that, like we're gonna ask, there's enough food to fill all of your food banks all the time.
No, well.
And your little free pantries never sit empty, so all the neighborhoods always have food access?
Yeah, they never sit full.
Oh, that's different.
Yeah, that's a better answer.
So if resources are limited and they finally get the courage to come to a pantry or to go to, and then there's still not enough, what do people do?
Well, the harsh reality is that sometimes they just go from food bank to food bank. But if you're going from food bank to food bank and taking the bus or using your car, using your gas, you're not going to have time to go to school or to go look for that other job or to have a second job. So that becomes part of the cycle of poverty if you have to go from food bank to food bank. That's why so many of us try to make it a one-stop shop and give people enough at least for the basics for their week. And I think food banks are getting smarter about that too. I know here, you just don't know it yet, but at our other sites, we've implemented even some line management software that like restaurants use, so that to discourage people from coming that early. And we're also getting smarter on how we stock and do inventory too, so that we can move product in so that the same stuff is, not always, but similar items might be available all day long, so that nobody has to feel like they come at, literally the alarm went off at our Southeast Tacoma location at 4 in the morning, and I don't go there until the sheriff gets there first for safety reasons. I showed up about an hour after the sheriff got there, and about 5:30 in the morning, a gentleman comes out, sets up his chair. They weren't opening until, I think, 11 o'clock that morning, and he was there at 5:30 a.m. And I'm like, what are you doing? Don't, it's cold. You don't need to be here. There'll be food, I promise. But that's the fear that you're going to miss out, that you're not going to get what you need for the week. And we've got to stop that. So food banks have to get smarter on that end too, and do line management and do inventory management so that we can get people served the proper way so that they really only need to visit you once a week. But we can't do that without community because we are all pretty much donor funded.
Yeah, I want to open up to some questions from the crowd, but I know you guys are somewhat familiar with each other. You know where food banks and some food banks are wired together, but how much do you guys actually work together to identify like gaps within the system within Lakewood or Pierce County in serving people?
Well, from our standpoint, we're aware of each other, but we're not eligible for support in what we do as the Little Free Pantry. So we get no government support. We get no food bank support. What we do is serve as an adjunct to the food banks. We also serve as an exchange service. So if EFN gives people a bag of macaroni, dried macaroni, they'll oftentimes exchange that with us, particularly if they're living in their car, because there's not much you could do with dried macaroni. So we end up with a lot of that. We end up with a lot of garbanzo beans. There are certain things that are predictable that don't go. Just as an example, boxed macaroni and cheese, which we could get a lot of, is one of the last things to leave the pantry. What they want are the cupped macaroni and cheese, so they don't have to prepare it, because maybe they don't have the things to prepare it.
Yeah, the extra ingredients. Yeah.
Or a pot.
So my other sort of last question before I open it up is, so what do we do about it is one of the questions our group keeps asking. What can smaller faith communities like ours or individuals do that will actually help make a difference?
So I would say one, at the most basic level is visit your local food bank. For the people here, if you go to church here, try, if you can, come and volunteer. Meet the people that are coming to the food bank. That piece right there is so important, because as the more people that are seeing the faces and interacting with and becoming friendly with folks that use the food bank, they can, when they are overhearing or in discussion, can be like, well, no, that's really not, it's not the person who's sitting on the corner who is asking for change that really is going to the food bank. You know, that piece right there is just educating that. The other thing, if you have any opportunity to advocate in terms of your local government, you know, our government doesn't always make the best decisions for its residents. Specific to Springbrook, the decision was made to give the permits and everything and okay a McDonald's to be built in that neighborhood. They don't have a grocery store, but now they're going to have a McDonald's there. They, as Bob said, the rent is going up there, but they're having a McDonald's. People can't afford their houses, but they're going to have a McDonald's to go to there. So it's just things like that. So if you could advocate, you know, with your local government, that would be fantastic. So.
Everything Don said. Okay, everything Don said, but check on your neighbors. You know, do your neighbors, could they be food insecure? Is your neighbor active duty military? They got paid this week, but are they going to be in a hurt situation in 2 weeks? Most food banks allow a designated person to shop for somebody else. So if you know somebody who has transportation issues and can't get to a food bank, maybe offer to go to the food bank for them once a week and shop for them, or meal trains. But I think it's those are small steps people can take. And Don mentioned advocating or just telling your personal lived stories, either whether you've lived through food insecurity or have interactions with people who have. Share those stories with your schools, with your faith organizations, with other communities, with your neighbors, and really that grassroots engagement on this issue can move the needle a long way, and all of us can help support food insecure neighbors much, much more with that grassroots kind of advocacy.
Yeah.
From our standpoint, if you could just look in your neighborhood and see whether there's a pantry, and when you go shopping, buy a little bit more and put something in the pantry. If you have groups or organizations that could hold a food drive to bring some of that in, there's a lot of ways you can help with the pantries. We're considering one where the lady wants to put in Lake City. And one of the things that I want to work on is how do you tell the people on the waterfront that there are people they drive through that are in need? You know, because if your mindset is, I'm trying to maintain my weight, maybe I need to lose a little bit, I want to eat healthier, how do you look through that lens and look at somebody and say, or identify that they're food insecure?
One of the things that I encourage people to do, especially as the holidays are coming, any holiday party you're going to have, add a food drive to it, right? We're having a small get-together with coworkers or the Retired Teachers Association, since we have a union former president with us. Yeah, sure, party, have fun, celebrate with family, friends, coworkers, but let everyone know, like, hey, everyone who comes, just bring a couple. We're going to do some stuff for a local food bank or one of the Little Free Pantries. If someone wanted to stock a Little Free Pantry, and I don't know where one is, how would I find it?
Well, if you go on lakewoodrotary.com, we have a map of the pantries there. And if you find one in your neighborhood, just go by and put things in. No one will stop you from doing that. The health department regs are they have to be in the original packaging and not expired. When we first started the pantry at the Presbyterian Church, someone was making a lot of really good smelling oatmeal cookies and putting them in Ziplocs, and we had to take them out. But just help and support in that way. If you have an organization that you would like one of us from the Little Free Pantries to come to talk to, or if you'd like to consider being a host for a pantry, You know, in my mind, having a Little Free Pantry here to supplement the food bank for the person who gets here an hour after the place closes, or for someone who's looking for diapers for their kids at 11 o'clock at night, and hygiene items. So.
Yeah. If you have a question or you want a specific or a general question you'd like them to answer, if you can, use the microphone so everybody can hear you in the room. And if moving is a challenge, we do have a couple wireless. I can bring a microphone to you. But if there are questions from the audience, I would love to entertain them. And if you don't have a question, I'm going to keep talking, and nobody wants that. I will, while you think about a question, I'll share a story. One of the things we did, I used to do a lot of just youth work, and so we had the junior high camping trip that we were taking kids on. And part of that, we attached Bring Food for the Hungry, and so we had this box of donated items for the hungry. And we get there with these junior high kids, and we sort of make them work all afternoon, right? You're setting up the tents, getting the facility set up, do a few activities. We had a lesson, and all of a sudden there becomes this grumbling like, they're junior high kids, right? When are we going to eat? And we had to let that build a while until we had this consensus. We were close to mutiny with this junior high group, and they're like, we're hungry. We want to eat. It's like, okay, well, let's look in the box of food that you just collected and brought to feed the hungry, because you guys are hungry, right? So this is what we have to make a meal out of. Typically, too, the challenge in this, when a lot of times people do, like, especially kids, like, I would go through my like, oh, asparagus, like, I hate that. Like, we would donate the stuff we don't want to eat. That's not actually caring for our neighbors well, right? And so we made the junior high kids like, you are now hungry. You brought food for the hungry. You have to figure out a meal with these things you brought. Just to challenge the mindset, right? So even if we're bringing food, yes, in original packaging, whatnot, but people want healthy options. People want nice, like as opposed to giving our extra. What if we gave, like, this is what I would want to eat? This is what would make me happy if I was desperate and I had to go someplace and I was able to pull this can of whatever. I like just Campbell's chicken noodle soup, the flavor, the texture of it. There's something about it that it's a nostalgia piece for me. Like, what is going to act, like, what would that's what I'm going to donate. Because it's not about just giving the surplus or the gross extras. It's giving meaningful stuff. Nate?
So, is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
So my name is Nate Berkstead, and I'm in the process of starting Lakewood Pride. I just want to say thank you for hosting this event here and for all of the work that you guys do. I'm also in the process of working with the neighborhood association for the Custer neighborhood. So it's from Steilacoom all the way to John Dower and that entire neighborhood. It's probably approximately, 2,000 families that are there. When I met with you last Thursday, you talked about being a forensics of where do you actually put your fingerprints and your money, and if you talk about, feeding, you care about the homeless, then you can find the money trail of where is that, the forensic analysis, and I've really thought about that. One of the things that we do at our house is we love to cook. We love to cook. And we cook lots of really delicious food, and we have lots of people come to our table. Strangers who are no longer strangers. We have people from across the country who come into our house. And one of the things that I would like to know is how can we get resources to keep feeding the people and creating those home-style meals that really do bring healing. My grandma is the biggest inspiration for that. And what she would do is she would cook these meals, and she would invite the homeless to her home. And I grew up around my grandma's table, and there were homeless people and businessmen and outside pastors and missionaries, and they all gathered around her table. And she was the one who taught me how to cook with love. And I'm currently a dad with 4 kids. I'm trying to feed 7 people myself, plus my community. And we need a miracle.
Yeah.
We need a miracle for this neighborhood.
So if I can summarize the question for that is, people who are providing meals for their neighbors, their community, where can they get resources? Because you guys trying to do it all on your own is a big reach. It's a big ask. So are there resources available for those type of scenarios?
Boy, cool work you're doing. Thank you. I'm trying to think really hard and looking at you, Don, too. We all, the food bank world, the larger organizations are all dependent on like the State Department of Agriculture, the USDA Department of Agriculture, and then writing for private grants and fundraising. The most grassroots things I have seen done on that level has been through churches or service groups like Kiwanis, Rotary, Lions, Elks, because they will sometimes adopt projects like that and bring time, talent, and treasure to them. But I wish I had a more robust answer for you, but I'm going to keep thinking about it and find out how to get a hold of you in case I have a moment.
I would make a comment, and Rose, you stop me when I'm getting it wrong. We had, over the last 5 years, Lakewood Rotary has reached out to a number of different places, and my rule is you can't turn anyone down because they won't ask you again. So as an aside, I've got 6 cases of menopausal vitamins, if anybody has an interest or a use for those. But we have contacts, for example, with Multicultural Center, and occasionally we get frozen food that's been prepared. And if you make your needs known to people, we are always looking for some place to put something, like the menopausal vitamins. Just a quick example with that, it's kind of related, but in Springbrook, I've run into a lady who comes once a month, and she gets food from a tribal food bank. And my wife and I were at Panera's having some soup, and she sent me a message that I'm over at Springbrook and I'm putting things out. I said, oh, great, send me some pictures, because I always like to send pictures around to people, so maybe we'll get more donations. And she sent me the pictures, and she had, stuff laid out, as wide as the platform here, and cases of milk, cases of frozen chicken, and I thought, oh my God, first the health department is gonna kill me. So we ran over there, my wife and I, I'm going along there thinking, okay, who has freezers, who has refrigerators I call on? I know Christ Lutheran, Steilacoom Community Center, I could put stuff there. And I got there, and everything was gone. Bare boxes. The need is so great there that the word got out, everything disappeared in 20 minutes. But just maybe give me your information, because I kind of keep a mental list of, okay, I got this, what could I do with it?
Yeah.
So if I get 200 pounds of frozen food, do you have a freezer?
So is there, like within Lakewood, is there any like central clearinghouse for excess stuff? Like you got these vitamins, but how do people know is there, or you guys, end up with 10,000 pounds of noodles donated, and you're like, what do I do with all of these noodles? Is there any sort of centralized communication, networking, collaborative pieces?
There is, but it's for food banks. So the Emergency Food Network, which is located here in Lakewood, if you think of food banks as the grocery store, they're the distributor, so they manage the state commodity, government commodity. They fundraise to purchase food, but this is why Bob's saying we won't give them a bunch of food, because all of the food we get through organizations like EFN, Food Lifeline, which is part of Feeding America out of Seattle, and Northwest Harvest, are all contractually given to us, and there's stipulations that they have to stay within our own network. It has to do with safety, a lot of it. So when I get asked questions like, well, how can you help us, or how can I help the little pantries, there's no real clearinghouse for that kind of work unless you are actually a food pantry, and we have to abide by different rules. So it's kind of, it's a limited system.
We are over our time, and I want to honor that and get people out of here. I will encourage you to stay connected with other groups, and they have information. We are going to do a meeting next month around housing insecurities, and there are flyers for the next event. Please feel free to take extra and share them, but that'll be in a month, and Jason Scales from LASA will be with us, and we'll be looking at that from a different perspective. For our church that's here, and I also know another church, and their pastor just left, who happens to have space that they're trying to figure out what to do with. One of the things we said is we need to learn some things so we know what questions to ask. And so now one of my, what questions to ask is, what if, because yes, food that's getting donated has to stay within the network, but sometimes there's others, restaurants, groceries, community members. What if the churches in collaboration could actually serve as that clearinghouse? That we actually had dedicated space to receive extra vitamins, and then network with the community to also know, not only here's the people who have extras, but we're getting the requests. Hey, that's great. You have this extra frozen food. I happen to know someone who's doing, what if, and I'm not saying we're doing that, not committing to anything. This is my curiosity mind to be what if that's the role? What if that's the mission of the church, is to be that clearinghouse that connects needs to resources, and people just know that that's the role we get to play in partnership with Lakewood Presbyterian, because they got a good building. I'm just volunteering them.
When you talk to Jason, they have a relationship with Chick-fil-A, and they get products from them, and they have it available there. So, in my world, outside of this world, it's all about networking.
Right.
And it's all about keeping your mind open of, okay, who could use this stuff? And sometimes, for example, the dried macaroni noodles, I found I take them to the Steilacoom Community Center because they have adult meals a couple times a week, and those folks have the skills, the time, the equipment to do something with it.
Yeah, and a lot of it is that networking, but if, that, who knows all of those relationships and those connections, and maybe that's a role we play. I want to let everyone go. Stick around, eat some snacks if you want, but be free to depart. I really do want to encourage people. This is our first attempt at this, so we're hosting a town hall meeting, and I'm excited that we did it. We'll figure out some things and some time management stuff for myself. But we have a series of these that are scheduled, and we want to be able to hear the voice of the broader community. And so if you guys can help us to engage with neighbors and people again, take the flyers for next month as we're talking about houselessness and housing insecurity, which is leading to houselessness. We plan on having one of these specifically around immigration support. What does that look like? We're getting requests from the broader denomination, transitional housing. There's all sorts of issues that are going into that. We want to look at how do we actually support the LGBTQIA+ community, and not just by hanging a flag or saying those things, but what does that actually look like, and what are those barriers? These are all sort of conversations we want to have, and we want to also address specifically kids that are in need and where the kids' resources are falling short, and so partnering with Caring for Kids on that. So we have a set of these that we want to have. But even here, I love your participation. Our questions are limited. Our curiosity is limited. The broader we make this, the more we get people involved. It's just going to be a learning opportunity for us, which is important. So thank you again for coming. Thank you guys for sharing your time, wisdom, expertise, and everything you do. I'll take these from you guys and